So I've been playing Dead by Daylight since 2017, and throughout all of these years, I've seen this game go through a lot of things. Game-breaking bugs that made the game unplayable, controversies that split the community, cheaters running rampant and getting away with it, balancing decisions that almost kill the game on the spot. We've seen it all, and I have to say, despite all of these adversities, right now, DBD seems to be getting its act together. They're listening to feedback more than before. They're doing a lot of initiatives to increase the quality of life, and some of the last content generally is getting better on most fronts. So DBD, if you're watching, good job. Keep it up. This is definitely the way to keep going ahead, despite all of the baggage that this game is currently carrying, obviously. But that being said, there seems to be one issue, one problem that no matter what happens just keeps getting worse, or at least doesn't seem to get any better. And that is the gap, the chasm, the huge disparity between the strongest killers in the game, such as Blight or Nurse, and the weakest killers in the game, such as Myers or Trapper. And why this gap exists isn't immediately visible and isn't immediately obvious. In fact, if you start playing DBD as a beginner, there's really not that much difference between a Nurse and a Trapper. In fact, sometimes the stronger killer will perform worse because they are slightly difficult to play, and newer players are not very good at it. This is something that is obviously reflected in the statistics, where very strong killers sometimes are actually at the bottom of the tier list because people don't know how to play them. Additionally, there's been a lot of buffs to weaker killers. For example, Trapper and Myers have only received buffs, and also Nurse and Blight, killers that are this strong, typically have received nerfs. Even though they were a long time coming, they have overall been nerfed. So if the strongest killers get nerfed and the weakest killers get buffed, how is there still such a gap? And where exactly do you see this gap? Well, you can do a simple experiment like I did some time ago. In this experiment, I played as Trapper, one of the weaker killers, with the best possible build using every advantage I could possibly have. And on the other side, my streamer buddy Hens played as Nurse, one of the stronger killers, but with nothing. No perks, no add-ons, completely empty build. I had to fight to the bitter end in many of my matches. I struggled a lot and managed to get a pretty respectable result. But the Nurse actually got an even better result, and in most of her games, she won her matches a lot more decidedly and with a lot more room to spare, and it was also probably far less stressful and she had to make less risky decisions. That is the real difference between an S tier and a D tier, something that is also very, very visible in tournaments. In tournaments, very strong killers like Blight would often win almost every single match if they weren't restricted and some perks and add-ons weren't banned. And on the flip side, some of the weaker killers are so unbelievably weak that they need to be played on very specific maps, and survivors need to be limited quite a lot by the rule set, otherwise they would almost never even get a single kill. So how is it that this problem isn't getting better? Well, my point in this video is that even though the developers have tried to directly offset this gap, they've also indirectly kept widening it and making it bigger in certain areas. And today we're going to run through some bullet points and talk about them. Let's talk first about the least important ones, and we're going to get into increasingly bigger and bigger issues. The first and most natural issue is the normal skill expression of survivors. Dead by Daylight has a matchmaking system that tries to pair you with people of equal skill, and over time, over the years, people overall just get better. Many of the structures in this game remain the same. Things like main buildings and especially things like shack or jungle gyms are all basically the same. And over time, people just get better at running these structures. And one common thing that is present among the lower tier killers is that almost all of them play the exact same way. Most of the low tier killers are M1 type killers, killers that move at the same speed, attack in the same way. Their power doesn't really give them any crazy mobility or distance or range. They all have to catch up to you slowly, and these killers are particularly easier to counter in structures that survivors are good at. Now, this is something that is probably slowly going to get better. Some of the newer maps have unique structures that survivors are not so good at running yet. And even though they currently use a lot of map offerings to go back to maps that are familiar, map offerings are getting nerfed in the future. They will be less effective. This means that in a few months from now, we will have more different maps that are less predictable for survivors. And I guess the survivors will have less control over exactly where they take you. This should give a better chance to low tier killers. So this is one of those things that I think will probably get better over time. Now, another issue that does affect low tier killers definitely a bit more are chase perks. And I mean all of the chase perks. We're talking about things that give auto reading on the killer. We're talking about things that make you faster when you vault. We're talking about exhaustion perks. We're talking about everything. We have had recently some new perks added to the game. Finesse allows you to vault faster. Obviously, we still have keys and a lot of new auto-reading perks that allow you to see killers through walls. We even have a collection now of perks that only trigger when you stun the killer, such as Exultation and Smash Hit. And almost all of these perks are easier to use on low-tier killers. Some of them, in fact, are useless against high-tier killers because high-tier killers almost never get stunned. They have bigger mobility options, so they catch up to exhaustion. So all of these perks, they are fun, they are engaging. I don't think they are a bad thing for the game, but many of the high-tier killers just eat them. They don't care about them. And because low-tier killers have to play in predictable ways, they do have to deal with perks like this a little bit more often. Another shift that has occurred when it comes to perks is to slowdown. It used to be that most of the popular and powerful slowdown perks for killers to make the generators a bit slower were passive. We had things like Corrupt Intervention, we had things like Ruin, and even things like Surge, which only trigger from basic attacks. Most S-tier killers down you with their special attacks, so Surge has never been really popular in them. So when these perks were the best slowdown that was available, this was a more equitable ground for S-tier and low-tier killers. Now we have migrated to a more active slowdown types of perks. The best slowdown perks at the moment often come as a result of you getting a down or you getting a hook. And while this is not a problem per se, I do think it's probably even better. It is undeniable that high-tier killers, they get more downs per minute, they get the first down much quicker, and these perks are much, much better at them. Low-tier killers like Myers, like Trapper, they often start out slow, and yeah, maybe later they will snowball into action, but they start out slow. And that means that these perks are just not so good on them, and oftentimes will be wasted. Meanwhile, some killers like Nurse, they start fast and they keep going fast, and they snowball into more damage, into more downs, into more slowdown. You can very easily run 4 slowdowns on some of these killers and get value from all of them, making it really, really difficult. So, is this a problem? How can we correct it? I think better perk design would be amazing. Right now, there are some of these perks that punish survivors for doing things that really shouldn't be punished, like staying on a gen, screaming, and having the gen block. These things should probably be looked at because the S-tier killers definitely make better use of them. But still, this isn't the biggest issue. I do think a much bigger issue right now is the hook timer. At some point, survivors could be on the hook for 60 seconds and then they would die or go to the next stage. But in order to combat camping, which is admittedly not very fun, the developers made a base kit increase to 70 seconds. Survivors can be on the hook for 70 seconds. There are also 2 perks, one of which is very easy to use, which can extend this to 100 seconds as well. So a single survivor could be on the hook for 100 seconds at a time, no problem. Now, this for high-tier killers is almost never an issue. High-tier killers do not need to camp and often do not want to camp. They will often get a hook, harass generators or injure other people or down other people, and they don't have a problem committing to anyone. S-tier killers almost by definition can chase you anywhere. They don't shy away from chasing you in a main building. They don't shy away from chasing you in a place with a lot of pallets. Sometimes some of them just straight up ignore pallets. Nurse. So it's not a big deal for them if someone stays on the hook a long time. Obviously, it's not good, but it's not too bad either. Now, compare that to lower tier killers. Lower tier killers in general are slower. Some of them need to set up and are more area control heavy, such as Trapper. So if they hook a survivor, they don't have the ability to very quickly go and check around the map because they often don't have any mobility. And if they go around the map and they find one survivor, they have to kind of commit. It used to be that with 60-second timers, it honestly was a little bit difficult for survivors sometimes to guarantee an unhook. You might remember that back in the day, if you were healthy, a killer could grab you out of an unhook. And there was no such thing as anti-camp or anything like that. So a killer could very reasonably injure a few people, hook someone, defend generators in the area, and then defend the hook for a little bit. And that would force survivors to heal and make some kind of altruistic play. Worst case scenario, if a survivor went there unprepared, they could even be grabbed. Now, I'm very glad that the healthy grabs out of hooks were removed. That was absolutely a good thing. But it also has made it very easy for survivors to wait it out. A survivor can wait 60 seconds, come in by themselves healthy, and then unhook. Nothing you can do about it as most low tier killers, which is not a problem. Obviously, we don't want killers to camp. But the problem is that if you cannot camp, then you have to commit. And if you have to commit, that means that you have to chase probably the first survivor that you see. If you don't chase the first survivor that you see, there's a good chance the unhook happens and you get nothing and you've wasted a minute of your time. And therein lies the problem. A killer that is low tier cannot commit to chases very easily. If you hook a survivor and you go for someone else and they're in a really good area with lots of pallets, maybe a main building, maybe an area with very few hooks, or an area where you know you're susceptible to sabotage, it is really difficult to go back to the hook and exert any kind of pressure because the 70-second default timer is brutal. During that time, the survivors can pop so many gens and do so much progress that you genuinely need to hook and immediately put pressure on someone else. And doing that as an S tier killer is very easy. Doing that as a lower tier killer is very hard. That is the entire point. And one of the reasons why this is so difficult, and one of the reasons that is completely linked to this, is just how absurdly strong survivors are upon the moment of unhooking. Now, most of these changes that came to the game were they came from a good place. They had some good reasoning, right? But they actually backfire in some ways. When survivors become unhooked, they have so much power. First of all, there are now 2 perks that allow survivors to unhook themselves. If you ever stay close to a hook, sometimes, even if you're not planning on camping, a survivor can unhook themselves. Sometimes, let's say you hook a survivor between your 3-gen, you could reasonably give the survivor anti-camp depending on where you are. And if not, you will have to concede that you have to stay away. They could, then get the unhook for free. So when survivors unhook themselves, it's obviously really strong. They now have perks like Resurgence, which allow them to heal in possibly 2 seconds by themselves, which is super crazy, especially when lower tier killers have to work a lot harder. And there's also the whole anti-tunnel set of perks, the strongest ones being Off the Record and Decisive Strike. Decisive Strike against a nurse or a blight is not that big of a deal. They'll catch up to you really quickly. Decisive Strike against a lower tier killer is huge because it does give you quite a bit of critical distance. And perks like Off the Record are so generous with the amount of endurance that they give you that this will happen to you. People will come and body block for you, but we'll talk about that. Basically, there are a lot of perks and mechanics introduced to help survivors avoid being tunneled, which I think is awesome, but almost all of them hit the lower tier killers a lot more than they do otherwise. We haven't even talked about Shoulder the Burden. Shoulder the Burden is obviously an extra punishment if you are even thinking of tunneling or even thinking of tunneling in the late game, basically punishing you for not being able to get enough hooks, which as a low tier killer is a little bit harder. Now, possibly the most underexplored aspect of this whole thing is high-level altruism play. This is the thing that I think really sets the low-tier killers and the high-tier killers apart. It's something that is super obvious when you play tournaments, when you play against a Swift that is like unbelievably good. And also something that virtually never ever happens at lower levels. At lower levels, survivors are not mechanically or teamwork-wise coordinated enough to pull anything off that's super impressive. But as you play against better and better survivors, you will see that they will come and body block more often. That is when someone comes and takes a hit. That they come and sabotage more often. Keep in mind, sabotage as a mechanic is often banned or at least heavily limited in tournaments, because in some situations survivors can abuse it so much it's actually really game breaking. and other forms of high-level altruism, such as dropping pallets and, dying under a pallet so that when you get picked up, a teammate picks you up. Now, thankfully, some perks like background player have been nerfed that make this really, really powerful, but we are also getting new perks such as duty of care, which also allows high-level altruism. Now, there is a common trend to almost all of these things that I'm talking about. Almost all of these things work very, very well on low-level killers. Low-level killers, such as Trapper, such as Doctor even, Clown, any killer that has normal M1 type chase power, you can very easily body block for them. And this is something that in tournaments can be abused, and, there's just like so many examples. It would be really easy for me to point out a few, but basically teammates can body block very, very easily against the lower tier killers, and it works really, really well, and it's very crippling for killer. The whole pallet, dying under pallet and saving someone, that part of the game is actually really, really broken at high level. There are some maps where the entire strategy of survivors in tournaments is to die under a pallet and have someone wait nearby with balanced landing, and the killer can do literally nothing. There's nothing you can do in some of these situations. But here's the thing, none of these strategies work against high-level killers. High-level killers, for the most part, can absolutely play around this. A high-level killer can leave a survivor on the ground and go for someone else and get an injury or a down very, very quickly. A high-level killer with mobility, which most of them do have, can easily catch up to you and chase you down if you have a flashlight and you're going for a flashy save. Many killers that insta-down that are high-level, like Billy, body blocking against them is very, very dangerous, or sometimes downright impossible. Some of them are so fast or can go right through you, so body blocking becomes literally impossible. So the extent at which these strategies completely fail against high-level characters is mind-boggling. It is crazy how one pallet save can be completely game-breaking for Trapper and a complete nothing burger for Nurse. Sometimes it can even backfire against high-tier characters, because many survivors are on the field instead of just doing gens, which against these killers, sometimes they just have to sit on gens and accept that you will die. So that is a problem. Now, how does this get fixed? I have no idea. I do think that maybe in the future, there should be some kind of mechanic that prevents survivors from doing this repeatedly. Sabotaging could have a longer cooldown. For instance, saving a teammate with a pallet maybe would have some kind of condition that doesn't let it happen more than once, and things like this. And perks like background player, duty of care, they need to be balanced very, 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 very carefully. Ideally, this goes without saying, S-tier killers deserve more nerfs. They deserve more nerfs. And I'm sorry to say this. They also could be made a little bit easier to play, to compensate, but they do need some nerfs. And ideally, low-tier killers also, need a bit more help. But I hope that these points help you understand a little bit why this gap exists, why it's probably not going anywhere. And the final takeaway from this is that this problem, despite being there and being so obvious for high-level players, it's completely inexistent at lower levels of skill for newer players, people that are, a bit more average at the game. They don't play it at such a high level. For these people, these killers all play basically the same, or actually lower tier killers sometimes play out even stronger. And what you will generally realize at lower levels is that the strongest killers are typically the ones that have side objectives. When you look at the kill rates that they recently released, by the way, the developers just released kill rates, the killers that are the strongest typically have some kind of weird thing going on in the background, some side objective that survivors must do. And because average players are a little bit confused and they don't understand that, oh, I shouldn't do chest, or, oh, watch out, I'm going to be teleported to by Freddy if I'm healing, these things kind of mess with them a little bit. So yeah, that's mostly where most of the balancing definitely goes there, and that's something that's quite obvious. Let me know what you think about the gap, and if you have any ideas to make it better other than just remove Nurse, remove Blight, remove Kaneki, remove Billy. Let's be realistic. If you have any ideas that you think are worth sharing, please share them with me in the description. I will actually read them and maybe tell Behavior some of the best ideas. Maybe we will help figure this out together.